Hi, and welcome to VFX Tutors. My name's Josh, and in this tutorial we're going to be starting our texturing basics with creating our first tileable texture. So I'm going to use Photoshop because this is just what I have, and you can use any editing software. So I'm just going to go File, Open, and you should have these reference. And this is just like some texture reference from our actual sword prop. And it's kept the settings I've had before, so this is what it will look like when you open it in Camera Raw. And I shot it with a macro lens and I didn't have particularly the best lighting, so I don't really want it to look like this. It's kind of a bit washed out and a bit slightly overexposed, I think. So I'm just going to go to my white balance, going to auto it, sort of bring some warmth back, and then I'm actually going to get Camera Raw to auto on it. And you can see it's brought out much more details, because when I create the bumps and the normals, you're going to want more detail. So, and from here it's kind of a little bit washed out, and this just looks nicer. So I'm just going to open image, and we have our texture reference. So I want this to go all over my handle of my sword, and you can sort of see I've got some differences in color tone here, which we kind of want to avoid. We don't really want that. So I'm going to select an area where it's much cleaner. We've got some variation here, but it's not that bad. So the first thing that I'm going to do is right click on my background and duplicate the layer. Just going to turn that off. And then I'm going to select my marquee tool. And then I'm just going to measure the width of this. So it's about 2.2. Because when I want to make my tiled surface, I want to get as much resolution out of it, and I want to sort of compensate for any sort of overlapping, or if I need to do it more than I need. So I don't want to scale this up or scale it down. So I effectively want to tile it as little as possible. So I'm going to double the width of this. So what was that? That was 2.2. So I want my tile to be 4 by 4 inches. And if I just times that by 3, I'll have 13.2. So the reason why I've got 13.2 is because that's what the sort of width and height I want of my actual first initial tile. Then we'll break it down into a grid. So I'm going to go to Image, Canvas Size. I'm just going to change this to 13.2. Click OK. And I'm going to proceed. It's going to crop it, but it's fine because we've got the bit that we need. So now the next thing I want to go to View, a new guide layout. It's still got the previous one I had set in before, but it might come in as 1.1. But the mouse is kind of a bit funny. You want to set this to 3 by 3 because I'm going to use this to snap to and sort of measure things, and it will make sense when we get further through. So effectively our tile that we're going to build is in the center, so it makes sense to sort of our first one. Let's line this up. You can sort of see it's, we could try and straighten this out if we want. At the moment I'm just going to pull this across so it's covering a bit less of this orange. Cool, so the first position that I want to do is figure out this sort of edge here. So if I pull this down, I don't want to trim it off too much, but obviously it's a little bit bent here, so maybe we could even use let's pick a little straight. We can straighten that up. I'm going to pull this down. I'm going to Control T and rotate this as well, because you can see it's not straight. But I'm going to focus on getting a decent matching edge here. We don't want to lose too much. Oh, so let's press Enter. So you can sort of see that's overlapping here. And you've got these little pyramids or triangles here. And I want to try and keep that consistent throughout. And it does... let's put a warp on it and see if we can possibly pull this down a little bit. Sort of straighten it out. We don't want to do this too much because you could start getting strange effects. And we want to try and keep it as natural as possible. So I think that's probably alright. So we've got our first initial position. And now what I'm going to do is select my marquee tool and make sure snap is on. Just going to snap to the bottom. And I'm just going to roughly sort of select that area, Control C, then Control V. I'm just going to pull this up. And I can maybe do the similar thing. So we're cross-hatched here. So it's up left. So it can actually be... So I'm trying to match this, imagine this sort of peak, and it's still following through. So we've got the peaks. When I say peaks, I'm still looking at this bit here. So triangle here. I can draw on it if it makes it a little bit more obvious. So I'm kind of following these bits here. And I'm imagining that they're going to pop out at the top here as well. So I know it's not perfect at the moment, but we'll get to that. So now I'm actually going to duplicate this, Control C, V that again. Now I'm going to pull this down until we get another set. Because we may have to, because we've got quite a big gap there. Let's change the opacity so we can see it a bit clearer. So I'm going to try and use this to bridge that sort of gap. I'm just going to slide this up, see if there's a better position. It's actually not so bad. So all I'm going to do now is select this layer and I'm going to go to my eraser. Change my opacity down. I'm just going to start erasing from that top layer, just so it blends in a little bit nicer. And we can always change the position if it's starting to look a little bit weird. It's starting to look a bit strange there, but we want to try and remove this seam first. Because we could probably just... There is a chance we could just use the clone tool, but I want to avoid using that to the last minute. So I'm just going to... Might be because my snap is on. So I'm just going to pull this down so there's maybe... slightly more natural in position, and I'm just going to erase those bits again. So we probably will get some sort of weird bits, but we're not seeing this up super close. I forget this is going to be wrapped around the handle quite far away. But if we can get this in a good place, it should make texturing a hell of a lot easier. At the end of the day, that's kind of where you want to be at. making your life easier. And you can sort of see there is some sort of change there, but I think that's not too bad. And then let's do the same up here. And if there are some really weird bits, we can use the clone tool to fix it. It's actually lining up much nicer up here. But yeah, this is quite small. We won't see lots of this texture. It's just going to be because we're not going to tile it that much. This is like for super over sort of kill positioning, I guess. Does seem a bit stretched. It seems a bit weird there, so what I will do is this and Control T. Oh, it's not on that. Let's escape that. So I'm actually going to merge these together now. I'm going to deselect first. So I'm just going to merge these. Just now it's on one. Just going to do that again. Just going to Control T. Just possibly. I think that might have made it worse. We can paint that out. So what we'll do, we'll use the clone tool. Change our opacity so it's a little bit higher. Yeah, I think what I've done by accident is possibly layer it up a little bit wrong, but let's not worry too much. In fact, let's undo that and see if we can. I want to try and fix it. So let's. If we just pull this down, you get a better result. Maybe a little bit better. Let's cool, I think that should be right. So now we're just going to merge this. Merge these two. And you don't have to merge them, you could be using masks and stuff. Oh, we actually want to merge these two as well. Cool. So now I'm just going to select my marquee tool. Make sure your snap is on. So I'm going to Control C and Control V that, and I'm going to turn it off. So this is now our first part of our tile. So what I'd like to do is pick a side. Left, right, up, down, and we're going to match that. So the first thing that I'm going to do, I'm just going to call this. I'm going to call this mid 1 for now because that's going to change. So I'm just going to Control C and V that. I'm just going to drag this down, and I'm going to call this mid 2. It's not the mid, but we're going to fix this. So if I turn my clear guides, we can see we've got a seam here. Not a very big seam, so it's enough to be a little bit annoying. what we're going to do, we're going to make this seam disappear, and then we're going to duplicate it onto here. It'll make more sense when we do it. So what I'm going to do is going to select so we've got a mid bit. I'm just going to pull this down and sort of see we're kind of losing the seam here, which is good. So we can see we don't have to go that far. I'm just going to turn my guides back on to help, and my snapping is already on. Then I'm just going to select a big chunk. I'm going to Control C and Control V. I'm going to drag this to the top, and I'm going to use this to make the seam disappear on both parts. So I'm just going to call this the fill, top, bot, fill, because effectively what we're doing here now is fixing the top and the bottom. So I'm just going to slide this down until we've got a rough match on both ends. Can be quite tricky to get correct, but what we're doing, we're kind of making sure that our seam is in here, which is from a texture. We're not painting the seam, we're actually using the seam from a chunk of the actual texture, but then we're going to paint these in because it's a lot easier to paint that in. Let's turn snap off because I think that's making it snap to funny places. And all I'm trying to do is just try and find a section that fits the best on both sides, and I think it works really well down here. So I'm gonna work on the bottom bit first, and I will try and make this quite quick. They do tend to be quite long tutorials, which I'm sorry. So I'm just gonna remove this seam a certain amount. You'll probably want to spend way more time on this than I am. I just want to try and get this done quick so you're not sat for a huge long tutorials like most of the other ones are. I do try to make them quick, but some things just aren't quick. I don't really like I always hated the sort of sped up tutorials to get under, to sort of say it's a quick tutorial, but it's actually not. It's more of a speed run sort of tutorial. I try to explain as much as I can, which inevitably takes quite a long time sometimes. Probably doesn't help that I blabber sometimes. Yeah, I've got some funny bits here, but I think that should be okay. Cool, so now we've got that. And now we need to do this top bit up here, which could be a bit more tricky because it didn't line up as nicely as the other bit, but we can just see how it goes. As long as it doesn't look mental, it should be fine. And as long as we don't create things that are recognizably different, so we see that we don't want to see our changes in the tiles, because it's not really ideal. Let's change my brush size a bit. Clicking so much. So just gonna really go over that quite largely there. So I don't think it was matching too well on that bit anyway. Hopefully somewhere a bit further down it matches. Cool, so that actually looks not too bad. Obviously there's some discrepancies, but from the distance Let's turn our guide off. Clear canvas guides. And we see we've kind of made a pretty decent tileable texture. There are some strange bits here in the middle, but I'm not too worried about that. So we've got this top bottom fill, mid and mid, and I'm actually gonna select all of these and merge the layers. I know people don't like merging, you can save them or do it in a different one, but I'm just gonna select my rectangular marquee tool, turn my snap back on, and I am going to Control C and Control V. Let's turn that off. So now we've got our tile in the middle, but obviously we only changed this top part. So now what we really need to do is actually bring this back. And with our top one, because now we can sort of see we've got some mismatch. Let's go to our eraser tool. Let's make sure our opacity's on high, and we can bring up our size, hardness. Oh, not that big. All I'm doing is going to rub this out until you can't see it, any edits or any changes. So that means we're just changing. We've got the original blend that we did on here, and we're just moving it up on this tile. So now if I select both of these and merge layers, I can select this top one, Control C and Control V. Ooh, cancel that. And now, because that's our half of that, and that's got the top matching of that section that we just duplicated. So now if I do Control C and Control V to test it, hopefully we've now made a tileable texture from our top, so we can't really see it from there. And that works really well. Cool, so now we're just going to do the same thing for the left and right. So I'm going to call this mid 1, mid 2, and we're just going to do the same thing again. It can be a little bit confusing. I can go through it a little bit slower if need be on this one. So we've done the tiling of the top and bottom, so now we just need to do the left and right. So I'm going to do the exact same thing again. I've got my mid 1, and I'm going to select my mid 1, and I'm going to select a... Let's turn my guides back on. And I'm going to select a big chunk. Got to be careful that we don't break the top as well. So I'm just going to Control C, Control V on that one. Put this over the top. Just going to slide this along. And I actually want to focus on matching this top quite nicely. Because that's maybe in hindsight we should have done the top, the left and right first, because it's way more complex. But we can always go through and just double check it at the end. So I'm actually going to try and match these upside down peaks here. Cool, and I'm just going to do the same again on this one. I'm just going to call it the fill. I'm going to try and erase it to a certain amount where you don't see the seam. I'm going to do it quite large on this bit. So not doing too bad. And we'll definitely have to go back and have a look at the top and bottom. So we probably should have done the top and bottom first, I expect. Let's just turn our guides off. I think we got something pretty close. It's obviously not absolutely perfect, but we're not going to see it that close. Yeah, so we're going to do the same thing again. I'm going to select the fill, mid, and the mid one. I'm going to right click and merge layers. And what we're going to do is select my marquee tool. Snap's not on. Let's make sure snaps. It's quite important that snaps on, so it does actually keep it within the square. And Control C and Control V. I'm just going to slide this along. And if we turn our guides off, we can see we've got our seam again. So I'm going to go to my eraser. I'm going to start erasing it until you don't see any changes. Because at some point we're just erasing over an absolute duplicate. So we got a pretty good, it's not like absolutely perfect, but for what we need it's pretty close. So now I'm going to select our layer and our fill, and I'm just going to merge them. And there are loads of other ways people do this. This is just the way when you're working with complex tiles. Like, this is probably not, but actually the best thing to learn tiling on, to be honest. It's quite a tricky pattern. So I'm just going to Control C and Control V that there. Just going to hide that. So I'm just going to Control C and Control V. I'm just going to try and snap this, and I just want to check the tiling, and it's looking pretty good. I imagine we may have broken it on the top a little bit. That's actually alright. It's not that bad. And yeah, we're pretty much done. Like, we can spend, obviously you want to spend more time when you're doing it for your stuff. I may go over and fix some smaller bits, but I think this might actually be alright for what I need. Let's try Control C. Let's ooh. Where are they all duplicated? So let's see what it looks like. If we just do this whole section. Ooh. Cool, so obviously you can see we've got the main obvious thing is these highlights. So if we zoom out, the best way to check it is, like, up close we don't see much of a seam. We can see these thin lines here. But when we zoom out, we can actually start seeing repetitive highlights. It's not a big deal. What we can do is select all these and just delete them. We don't need them. So obviously we've got quite a few bespoke highlights. So let's select that. We can go to our image, adjustments, shadows and highlights. let's turn all this down. So we can clearly see that some of these are quite obviously brighter and darker. It might not be an issue. We can either, because it's not really going to pick too much up in the watermark thing, so we could just go to possibly a, where is it? Maybe burn might be what we want. It might not be. And we can go to the highlights. Yeah, that's not really what we want. Ooh. Let's just leave it for now. If it's a problem, we can fix it. But I think for like your first tile texture, that's going to work pretty well. So our next step is to sort of make this, sort this out so it's the right size, right? So let's go to our new guide layout. Okay. So that's 440, 4.4. So now we want to go to our canvas size. Change this to 4.4. Okay. Shouldn't have any clipping. Yeah. And let's file, save as, texturing, tile sword. Let's go new, tiled, complete. And we'll just call this sword wrap tile diff v01, and I'm going to save that as a tiff. About the layers, save, click OK. And what we'll do now, I'm just going to try it on the model, I guess. So I'm just going to open up Maya and see what it looks like, and hopefully it shouldn't be too crazy. So we have our Maya open, have my sword open, and you can still see it's got the sort of the UV checker on it. So I'm just going to select my sword wrap, and I'm just going to make a new material, nothing special. Just gonna pick a Lambert. It's going to go to my color, select the file, and I just want to go to my sword. Wait, oh, it's not in there, but there's my tile that I created. It's my sword wrap tile diff. Select open, and yeah, it looks not great because it's not currently tiled. It's currently using only one UV space. So it's actually easier to explain if I look in the UV editor. You can see that it's using an entire UV space, but I actually want to tile this. So if I go to my color, and if I go to place 2D texture, and I can go repeat UV. Let's have a look at, let's turn selection highlighting off. Let's try 10. And you can see it's looking pretty decent. It looks a bit big at the moment. It looks a little bit like Snakes In. It's probably because it needs a bump and all that, but we can create that. And you can sort of see, but we've done it. It's pretty decent. It's done a good job at tiling it. We've got some obvious sort of highlights there. We could probably why is that not changing? Ooh, don't want to do that. You can sort of see how it's changing, but we don't want to do that. It should. doesn't matter. Okay, but we've done pretty much done, and we tested it, and it looks all right. We've got some highlights here, and we can sort of offset that, I think. So let's even try. That's looking a bit better. You can see the way we viewed it, it's all following it round, so yeah, we're pretty much done. So if you've enjoyed that tutorial on how to tile in Photoshop or anything you want, hit that like button and subscribe for more like this.